The primeval mitosis. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs, and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib, which the Lord God had taken from man, made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones, and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of a man. Genesis chapter 2, verses 21 to 23. It is as if in the evolution of sex, a particle one day broke away from an X chromosome, and thereafter, in relation to X chromosomes, could produce only an incomplete female, the creature we now call the male. It is to this original chromosomal deficiency that all the various troubles to which the male falls heir can be traced. Ashley Montague, The Natural Superiority of Women. I think that any submerged class is going to be more accustomed to sexuality than a leisure class. A leisure class may be more preoccupied with sexuality, but a submerged class is going to be more drenched in it. You see, the upper classes are obsessed with sex, but they contain very little of it themselves. They use up much too much sex in their manipulations of power. In effect, they exchange sex for power, so they restrict themselves in their sexuality, whereas the submerged classes have to take their desires for power and plow them back into sex. Norman Mailer, The Presidential Papers. The roots of heterosexuality are buried in that evolutionary choice made long ago in some misty past, but not so remote that it can't be reached with the long arm of the mind by some unknown forerunner of Homo sapiens. Struggling up from some murky swamp, some stagnant mud hole, some peaceful meadow, that unknown ancestor of man, woman, by some weird mitosis of the essence, divided its unitary self in half into the male and female hemispheres of the primeval sphere. These hemispheres evolved into what we know today as man and woman. When the primeval sphere divided itself, it established a basic tension of attraction, a dynamic magnetism of opposites, the primeval urge, which exerts an irresistible attraction between the male and female hemispheres, ever tending to fuse them back together into a unity in which the male and female realize their true nature, the lost unity of the primeval sphere. This is the eternal and unwavering motivation of the male and female hemispheres, of man and woman, to transcend the primeval mitosis and achieve supreme identity in the apocalyptic fusion. Each half of the human equation, the male and female hemispheres of the primeval sphere, must prepare themselves for the fusion by achieving a unitary sexual image, i.e., a heterosexual identity free from the mutually exclusive, antagonistic, antipodal impediments of homosexuality, the product of the fissure of society into antagonistic classes and a dying culture and civilization alienated from its biology. Man's continuing striving for a unitary sexual image, which can only be achieved in a unitary society, becomes a basic driving force of the class struggle, which is, in turn, the dynamic of history. The quest for the apocalyptic fusion will find optimal conditions only in a classless society, the absence of classes being the sine qua non for the existence of a unitary society in which the unitary sexual image can be achieved. Each social structure projects onto the screen of possibility the images of the highest type of male and female sexual identities realizable within the limits of that society. The people within that society are motivated and driven by the perennial quest for apocalyptic fusion to achieve this highest identity, or as close as they can come to the perfection of the unitary sexual image. All impediments to realization of this image become sources of alienation, obstacles in the way of the self seeking to realize its ultimate identity. Since each society projects its own sexual image, the unitary society will project a unitary sexual image. We can thus postulate, following the model of Marx, that in ancient communal society, which was not cleft into antagonistic classes, there existed a unitary society in which a unitary sexual image was a natural coincidence with the way of life of the people. This is the lost innocence of the Garden of Eden. The class society projects a fragmented sexual image. Each class projects a sexual image coinciding with its class function in society, and since its class function will differ from that of other classes, its sexual image will differ also, and in the same proportion. The source of the fragmentation of the self in class society lies in the alienation between the function of man's mind and the function of his body. Man as thinker performs an administrative function in society. Man as doer performs a brute power function. These two basic functions I symbolize when they are embodied in living men functioning in society, as the omnipotent administrator and the supermasculine menial. Since all men are created equal, when the self is fragmented by the operation of the laws and forces of class society, men in the elite classes usurp the controlling and administrative function of the society as a whole, i.e., they usurp the administrative component in the nature and biology of the men in the classes below. Administrative power is concentrated at the apex of society, in the godhead of the society: pharaoh, king, president, chairman. Administrative power beneath the apex is delegated. Those in classes to which no administrative power has been delegated have the administrative component in their personality suppressed, alienated, denied expression. Those who have usurped the administrative function we shall call the omnipotent administrators, struggling amongst themselves for higher positions in the administrative hierarchy. They repudiate the component of brute power in themselves, claim no kinship with it, and project it onto the men in the classes below them. All the males in the classes beneath the omnipotent administrator or godhead of the society are alienated from the administrative component in themselves in proportion to their distance from the apex. That is, they perceive their alienation in terms of their distance from the apex. This perception of their alienation in terms of the apex is an illusion. In fact, their alienation must be measured by their distance from the attainment of a unitary sexual image, the takeoff stage for the apocalyptic fusion. Generally, in a fragmented class society, the basic impulse of omnipotent administrators is to despise their bodies and glorify their minds. Those who have been assigned the brute power function we shall call the supermasculine menials. They are alienated from their minds. For them, the mind counts only insofar as it enables them to receive, understand, and carry out the will of omnipotent administrators. The class society has a built-in bias, which tends to perpetuate the social system. The omnipotent administrators, wishing to preserve what they perceive as their superior position and way of life, have, from a class point of view, and also on an individual level, a negative reaction toward any influence in the society that tends to increase the number of males qualified to fulfill the functions of administration. When it comes to anything that will better the lot of those beneath him, the omnipotent administrator starts with a basic anti-reflex. Any liberality he might show is an indication of the extent to which he has suppressed his anti-reflex, and is itself a part of his lust for omnipotence. His liberality is, in fact, charity. The supermasculine menial clearly realizes that the superiority of the omnipotent administrators over him is based upon the development of their minds and the power they command as a result. Hence, he starts with a pro-reflex. He is, for example, pro-universal education at public expense. Weakness, frailty, cowardice, and effeminacy are among other attributes associated with the mind. Strength, brute power, force, virility, and physical beauty are associated with the body. Thus, the upper classes, or omnipotent administrators, are perennially associated with physical weakness, decay, underdeveloped bodies, effeminacy, sexual impotence, and frigidity. Virility, strength, and power are associated with the lower classes, the supermasculine menials. In feudal society, the men of the nobility, who are omnipotent administrators by divine right, are generally considered to have been weak, delicate, and effeminate, with the affectations of demonstrative homosexuals. The serfs and peasants are considered to have been physically strong, sturdy, hardy, fecund, supermasculine. The image of the omnipotent administrator, that he is markedly effeminate and delicate by reason of his explicit repudiation and abdication of his body in preference for his mind, is decisive for the image of the woman of the elite classes. Even though her man is effeminate, she is required to possess and project an image that is in sharp contrast to his, more sharply feminine than his, so that the effeminate image of her man can still, by virtue of the sharp contrast in degrees of femininity, be perceived as masculine. Therefore she becomes ultra-feminine. In order to project an image of ultra-femininity, the women of the elite repudiate and abdicate the domestic function of the female, which is, in the female, the counterpart of the function of brute power in the male. To enhance her image and to increase her femininity, the domestic component of her nature is projected onto the women in the classes beneath her, and the femininity of the women below is correspondingly decreased. In effect, a switch is made. The women of the elite absorbs into her being the femininity of the woman below her, and she extirpates her domestic component. The woman below absorbs the elite woman's cast-off domestic component and relinquishes her own femininity. The elite woman thus becomes ultra-feminine, while the woman below becomes sub-feminine. For the purposes of social imagery, the woman below becomes an Amazon. Thus, a most weird and complex dialectic of inversion is established in class society. The omnipotent administrator is launched on a perpetual search for his alienated body, for affirmation of his unstable masculinity. He becomes a worshiper of physical prowess, or he may come to despise the body and everything associated with it. Fearing impotence, impotence being implicit in his negation and abdication of his body, his profoundest need is for evidence of his virility. His opposite, The body, the supermasculine menial, is a threat to his self-concept, and to compound it all, this perceived threat and resultant fear is reinforced decisively by the fact that the men beneath him are a threat to him in reality, because their life goal is to destroy his omnipotence over them. He views them as his enemies and inferiors, men of a lesser breed than himself and his kind. He despises, hates them. Yet, because of the infirmity in his image and being which moves him to worship masculinity and physical prowess, the omnipotent administrator cannot help but covertly and perhaps in an extremely sublimated guise envy the bodies and strength of the most alienated men beneath him, those furthest from the apex of administration, because the men most alienated from the mind, least diluted by admixture of the mind, will be perceived as the most masculine manifestations of the body, the supermasculine menials. This is precisely the root, the fountainhead, of the homosexuality that is perennially associated with the omnipotent administrator. The dialectic of the supermasculine menial is the converse of that of the omnipotent administrator. The supermasculine menial has an infirmity of the brain because of his alienation from his mind. Because he despises weakness of the body in himself, the omnipotent administrator will have a secret or subconscious aversion to the women of his own class, because of the ultra-femininity which they have developed to counterbalance his effeminacy. At the same time, he will surpass himself in his efforts to conceal his aversion and make believe that the very opposite is true. He thus makes an icon of his woman and literally worships her. He pays obeisance to her ritualistically while in the chapel of her presence, enshrining her on a pedestal. He goes off seeking confirmation of his insecure masculinity elsewhere. Since the women of the elite tend to become the same, i.e., to project a homogeneous image of ultra-femininity, they cannot in the end satisfy his psychic need, the confirmation of his masculinity. Strength gauges its own potency through a confrontation with other strength. To test it, he must go where it is. He may become addicted to a masculine image sport, become a big game hunter, outdoorsman, mountain climber. He may find satisfaction enough from some outlet as to have no problem at all which he is aware of as a sexual infirmity. He may be unaware of his impotence because he is blinded by his dazzling success and superiority in another field. But in his quest for confirmation of his masculinity, a quest which he usually perceives as a search for sexual satisfaction and new conquests, his attention is attracted, with the force of the pull of gravity, to the potent bodies in the classes beneath him, to the strength. He may sexually exploit the white-collar bodies at the office. Then, on his descent toward the power source, he may be drawn to the blue-collar bodies in the plant. If these bodies leave him still in the clutches of his lust and insecurity, he will bore deeper and deeper into the lower strata until he finds his sexual balm of Gilead. There is a Pandora's box of sexual aberrations here. The body is tropical, warm, hot, fire. It is soft, pleasing to the touch, luscious to the kiss. The blood is hot. Muscles are strength. The basic motion of the woman of the elites is flight from their bodies. The weakness of the female body when contrasted to the strength of the male body is an obvious attribute of femininity as manifested in social imagery. Thus, to enhance and emphasize the femininity of her image, which is mandatory in order that she present a sharp feminine contrast to the effeminate image of her man, the omnipotent administrator. She seeks to increase the weakness of her body and stamp out all traces of strength, to differentiate it further from the effeminate form of her man. An appearance of strength in her body is called ugly. Having projected her strength, her domestic component, onto the women beneath her, she achieves an image of frailty, weakness, helplessness, delicacy, daintiness. Silks, ruffles, frills, bangles, and laces are her element. In the realm of sex, because the act of sexual intercourse is both a physical and mental process, a joint venture between the mind and the body, her basic contradiction is that she is physically inadequate, while mentally voracious, with her mind in extreme conflict with her body. The mechanism of her orgasm, which begins in her body and ends in the psychic depths of her mind, becomes short-circuited in the struggle between her mind and her body. Sitting at the foot of her bed, like the mute sphinx on the bank of the Nile, is the ogre of frigidity. She is terrified, because of the quality of her life, by the prospect of becoming a life-termer in the prison of frigidity. Her basic fear is frigidity, the state in which her frantic search for ultra-femininity collides with an ice-packed death of the soul, where the fire in her body is extinguished by the ice in her mind. The psychic core of her sensuality, the male-seeking pole of her feminine principle, the trigger of the mechanism of her orgasm, moves beyond the reach or range of the effeminate clitoris of her man. Frigid, cold, icy, ice, Arctic, Antarctic. At the end of her flight from her body is a sky-high wall of ice. If a lesbian is anything, she is a frigid woman, a frozen cunt with a warp and a crack in the wall of her ice. In proportion to the intensity of the ultra-feminine's fear and feel of the ice is her psychic lust for the flame, for the heat of the fire, the body. The ultra-feminine, seeking sexual satisfaction, finds only physical exhaustion in the bed of the omnipotent administrator, and the odds are against her finding psychic satisfaction there. Her psychic bridegroom is the supermasculine menial. The omnipotent administrator, having repudiated and abdicated his body, his masculine component, which he has projected onto the men beneath him, cannot present his woman, the ultra-feminine, with an image of masculinity capable of penetrating into the psychic depths, where the treasure of her orgasm is buried. The sexual act, being a joint venture of the mind and body, though he satisfy her body and sap its strength, he cannot touch that magic spot in her mind which triggers the mechanism of her orgasm. Bereft of psychic satisfaction and inhibited by social conventions and mores from embarking on a quest for her sexual fulfillment, yet performing her function as a mother and wife to the omnipotent administrator, the ultra-feminine becomes a psychic celibate. At the nth degree of the ultra-feminine scale of psychic lust, the contours of which few men or women throughout their entire lives ever in fact explore, resort being had to the forms of sublimation, stands the walking phallus symbol of the supermasculine menial. Though she may never have had a sexual encounter with a supermasculine menial, she is fully convinced that he can fulfill her physical need. it will be no big thing for him to do so, since he can handle those Amazons down there with him, with his strong body, rippling muscles, his strength and fire, the driving force of his spine, and thrust of his hips, and the fiery steel of his rod. But what wets the ultra-feminine's juice is that she is allured and tortured by the secret, intuitive knowledge that he, her psychic bridegroom, can blaze through the wall of her ice, plumb her psychic depths, test the oil of her soul, melt the iceberg in her brain, touch her inner sanctum, detonate the bomb of her orgasm, and bring her sweet release. The chip on the supermasculine menial's shoulder is the fact that he has been robbed of his mind. In an uncannily effective manner, the society in which he lives has assumed in its very nature that he, minus a mind, is the embodiment of brute power. The bias and reflex of the society are against the cultivation or even the functioning of his mind, and it is borne in upon him from all sides that the society is actually deaf, dumb, and blind to his mind. The products of his mind, unless they are very closely associated with his social function of brute power, are resented and held in contempt by society as a whole. The further away from brute power his mental productions stand, the more emphatically will they be rejected and scorned by society, and treated as upstart invasions of the realm of the omnipotent administrator. His thoughts count for nothing. He doesn't run, regulate, control, or administer anything. Indeed, he is himself regulated, manipulated, and controlled by the omnipotent administrators. The struggle of his life is for the emancipation of his mind, to receive recognition for the products of his mind, and official recognition of the fact that he has a mind. In his society, the mind has been adjudged superior to the body, and he knows that he is the body, and the omnipotent administrator is the mind. It's mind over matter, and the body is matter. He may despise the omnipotent administrator for his physical weakness and envy him for his mind, or he may despise his own body and idolize the weak body of the omnipotent administrator. He may even strive to attain a weak physical image himself in order to identify with the image of the omnipotent administrator. The people at the base of society, where the super-masculine menial is, are well known for their reflex of attempting to conform to the style, pattern, manners, and habits of the upper classes, of the omnipotent administrators and ultra-feminines. Just how this works itself out is a problem for analysis by sociologists and social psychologists on the mass level, and the head shrinkers and nutcrackers on the individual level. What we are outlining here is a perspective from which such analysis might best be approached. The psychic bride of the supermasculine menial is the ultra-feminine. She is his dream girl. She, the delicate, weak, helpless ultra-feminine, exerts a magnetic attraction upon him. When he compares her with his own woman, the strong, self-reliant Amazon, lust for her burns in his brain. He recoils from the excess of strength injected into the Amazon by the domestic function she performs. Also, since standards of beauty are set by the elite, the ultra-feminine personifies the official standard of feminine beauty of society as a whole. Influenced by and imbued with this official standard of beauty, while at the same time surrounded by Amazons who do not embody this standard and who are in fact clashing with it. The supermasculine menial develops an obsessive yearning and lust for sexual contact with the ultra-feminine. These yearnings are compounded by the fact that on the whole they are foredoomed to remain unfulfilled. The society has arranged things so that the supermasculine menial and the ultra-feminine are not likely to have access or propinquity to each other conducive to stimulating sexual involvement. In fact, it has not been rare for the supermasculine menial and the ultra-feminine to be severely persecuted, if not put to death, for such sexual contact. The Amazon is in a peculiar position. Just as her man has been deprived of his manhood, so she has been deprived of her full womanhood. Society has decreed that the ultra-feminine, the woman of the elite, is the goddess on the pedestal. The Amazon is the personification of the rejected domestic component, the woman on whom dishpan hands seem not out of character. The worship and respect which both the omnipotent administrator and the supermasculine menial lavish upon the image of the ultra-feminine is a source of deep vexation to the Amazon. She envies the pampered, powder-puff existence of the ultra-feminine and longs to incorporate these elements into her own life. Alienated from the feminine component of her nature, her reinforced domestic component is an awesome burden and shame of which she longs to be free. The Amazon finds it difficult to respect the supermasculine menial. She sees him essentially as only half a man, an incomplete man. Having no sovereignty over himself, he hasn't that sovereignty over her, which our traditional patriarchal myths lead her to believe he should have. On a still deeper level, the urges and needs of the Amazon psyche move her toward the source of power, toward the receptacle of sovereignty, an attraction motivated by the primal urge to transcend the primeval mitosis. When the primeval sphere split into the male and female hemispheres, the attribute of sovereignty was reposited in the male hemisphere, and this attribute exercises a magnetic attraction upon the female hemisphere. Usurping the supermasculine menial's mind, the omnipotent administrator usurped all sovereignty, and because of his monopoly on sovereignty, he is the psychic bridegroom of the Amazon. In another sense, however, being also attracted to the body of the supermasculine menial, the Amazon is lost between two worlds. In net effect, then, there will exist in class society two sets of competing images. Contending for the crown of masculinity is one image based on the body and another based on the mind. Contending for the crown of femininity is one image based on weak, helpless ultra-femininity and another based on the strong, self-reliant attributes of the Amazon. In a society with a racially homogeneous population, in which the people at the top are racially the same as the ones at the bottom, the competing images are not mutually exclusive. A supermasculine menial, for instance, who acquires the training of an omnipotent administrator, can become a member of the elite and function accordingly, assuming the existence of some vertical social mobility, which is not, of course, always the case. But even if he is prevented from ascending the social ladder, in fact, a supermasculine menial can at least imagine himself doing so without first having to transcend any biological barriers. Likewise, an omnipotent administrator can descend the social ladder, develop his muscles, and hold the role with the coolest surf on the manor. The women, too, can descend or ascend, depending on the merits, without having to breach a biological chain. But in a society where there exists a racial caste system, where the people at the top are sharply distinguished from those at the bottom by race as well as social image, then the two sets of competing images can come to be considered mutually exclusive. The gulf between the mind and the body will seem to coincide with the gulf between the two races. At that point, the fear of biological miscegenation is transposed into social imagery, and since the distinction between the two races is founded in biology, the social distinction between mind and body is made sacred. Any attempt by the supermasculine menial to heal his wound and reclaim his mind will be viewed as a malignant desire to transcend the laws of nature by mixing, mongrelizing, miscegenating. Coming from the other side, if a member of the elite should attempt to bridge the gulf, it will be conceived as the rankest form of degeneracy and treason to caste. Deep-seated fears and emotions, which are in fact connected with biological traits and are part of a mechanism to aid racial and ethnic survival, are harnessed to social images and thereby transformed into weapons of class struggle. Race fears are weapons in the struggle between the omnipotent administrator and the supermasculine menial for control of sexual sovereignty. The supermasculine menial and the Amazon are the least alienated from the biological chain, although their minds, especially the supermasculine menials, are in a general state of underdevelopment. Still, they are the wealth of a nation, an abundant supply of unexhausted, undesensed human raw material, upon which the future of the society depends, and with which, through the implacable march of history to an ever broader base of democracy and equality, the society will renew and transform itself. Convalescence. Just as in childhood, I envied Negroes for what seemed to me their superior masculinity, so I envy them today for what seems to me their superior physical grace and beauty. I have come to value physical grace very highly, and I am now capable of aching with all my being when I watch a Negro couple on the dance floor, or a Negro playing baseball or basketball. They are on the kind of terms with their own bodies that I should like to be on with mine, and for that precious quality they seem blessed to me. Norman Potterhertz. My Negro Problem and Ours. Commentary, February 1963. Why envy the Negro, his grace, his physical skills? Why not ask what it is that prevents grace and physical skill from becoming a general property of the young? Mr. Potterhertz speaks of middle class, white respectability. What does this mean but being cut off from the labor process, the work process, the creative process as such? The solution is thus not the direct liquidation of the color line through the liquidation of color, but rather through a greater physical connectedness of the whites and a greater intellective connectedness of the blacks. Irving Louis Horowitz, Chairman, Department of Sociology, Hobart and William Smith Colleges, Geneva, New York. Commentary, June 1963. If the separation of the black and white people in America along the color line had the effect in terms of social imagery of separating the mind from the body, the oppressor whites usurping sovereignty by monopolizing the mind, abdicating the body and becoming bodiless, omnipotent administrators and ultra-feminines, and the oppressed blacks, divested of sovereignty and therefore of mind, manifesting the body and becoming mindless supermasculine menials and black Amazons. If this is so, then the 1954 U.S. Supreme Court decision in the case of Brown v. Board of Education, demolishing the principle of segregation of the races in public education and striking at the very root of the practice of segregation generally, was a major surgical operation performed by 9 men in black robes on the racial marginal line, which is embedded as deep as sex or the lust for lucre in the schismatic American psyche. This piece of social surgery, if successful, performed without benefit of any anesthetic except God and the Constitution, in a land where God is dead and the Constitution has been in a coma for 180 years, is more marvelous than a successful heart transplant would be, for it was meant to graft the nation's mind back onto its body and vice versa. If the foregoing is true, then the history of America in the years following the pivotal Supreme Court edict should be a record of the convalescence of the nation, and upon investigation we should be able to see the omnipotent administrators and ultra-feminines grappling with their unfamiliar and alienated bodies, and the supermasculine menials and Amazons attempting to acquire and assert a mind of their own. The record, I think, is clear and unequivocal. The bargain which seems to have been struck is that the whites have had to turn to the blacks for a clue on how to swing with the body, while the blacks have had to turn to the whites for the secret of the mind. It was Chubby Checker's mission, bearing the twist as good news, to teach the whites, whom history had taught to forget, how to shake their asses again. It is a skill they surely must once have possessed, but which they abandoned for puritanical dreams of escaping the corruption of the flesh by leaving the terrors of the body to the blacks. In the swift, fierce years since the 1954 school desegregation decision, a rash of seemingly unrelated mass phenomena has appeared on the American scene, deviating radically from the prevailing hot dog and malted milk norm of the bloodless square, superficial, faceless, Sunday morning atmosphere that was suffocating the nation's soul, and all of this in a nation where the so-called molders of public opinion, the writers, politicians, teachers, and cab drivers, are willful, euphoric liars, or zip-damn ostriches and owls, a clique of undercover ghosts, a bunch of Walter Jenkinses, a lot of coffee drinking, cigarette smoking, sly, suck-assing, status-seeking, cheating, nervous, dry-balled, tranquilizer gulched, countdown-minded, out-of-style, slithering snakes. No wonder that many innocent people, the manipulated and the stimulated, some of whom were game for a reasonable amount of mystery and even adventure, had their minds scrambled. These observers were not equipped to either feel or know that a radical break, a revolutionary leap out of their sight, had taken place in the secret parts of this nation's soul. It was as if a driverless vehicle were speeding through the American night down an unlighted street toward a stone wall, and was boarded on the fly by a stealthy ghost with a drooling leer on his face, who, at the last detour before chaos and disaster, careened the vehicle down a smooth highway that leads to the future and life, and to ask these Americans to understand that they were the passengers on this driverless vehicle, and that the lascivious ghost was the Saturday night crotch funk of the twist, or the Yeah, 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 which the Beatles hijacked from Ray Charles. To ask these Calvinistic profligates to see the logical and reciprocal links is more cruel than asking a hope to die Okie music buff to cop the sounds of John Coltrane. In the beginning of the era came a thief with a 7-year itch who knew that the ostriches and the owls had been bribed with a fix of euphony, which is their kick. The thief knew that he need not wait for the cover of night, that with impunity he could show his face in the marketplace in the full light of the sun, do his deed, scratch his dirt, sell his loot to the fence, while the ostriches and owls, coasting on euphony, one with his head in a hole, any hole, and the other with his head in the clouds, would only cluck and whisper and hear, see, speak no evil. So, Elvis Presley came, strumming a weird guitar and wagging his tail across the continent, ripping off fame and fortune as he scrunched his way, and, like a latter-day Johnny Appleseed, sowing seeds of a new rhythm and style in the white souls of the white youth of America, whose inner hunger and need was no longer satisfied with the antiseptic white shoes and whiter songs of Pat Boone. "You can do anything," sang Elvis to Pat Boone's white shoes, "but don't you step on my blue suede shoes." During this period of ferment and beginnings, at about the same time that the blacks of Montgomery, Alabama, began their historic bus boycott, giving birth to the leadership of Martin Luther King, signifying to the nation that with this initiative, this first affirmative step, somewhere in the universe a gear in the machinery had shifted. Something, a target, came into focus. The tensions in the American psyche had torn a fissure in the racial Maginot Line, and through this fissure, this tiny bridge between the mind and body, the black masses who had been silent and somnolent since the 20s and 30s were now making a break toward the dimly seen light that beckoned to them through the fissure. The fact that these blacks could now take such a step was perceived by the ostriches and owls as a sign of national decay, a sign that the system had caved in at that spot, and this gave birth to a fear that quickly became a focus for all the anxieties and exasperations in the omnipotent administrators' minds, and to embody this perceived decay and act as a lightning rod for the fear, the beatniks bloomed onto the American scene. Like pioneers staking their claims in the no-man's land that lay along the racial Maginot Line, the beatniks, like Elvis Presley before them, dared to do in the light of day what America had long been doing in the sneak thief anonymity of night, consorted on a human level with the blacks, reviled, cursed, held in contempt by the molders of public opinion, persecuted by the police, made into an epithet of derision by the deep-frozen geeks of the hot dog and malted milk set, the beatniks irreverently refused to go away. Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac, the Suzuki Rhythm Boys, James Baldwin called them, derisively in a moment of panic, tired of white ambitions and dragging themselves through the Negro street at dawn looking for an angry fix, with, as Mailer put it, the black man's code to fit their facts. Bing Crosbyism, Perry Comoism, and Dinah Shoreism had led to cancer, and the vanguard of the white youth knew it. And, as the spirit of revolt crept across the continent from that wayward bus in Montgomery, Alabama, seeping like new life into the cracks and nooks of the northern ghettos, and sweeping in furious gales across the campuses of Southern Negro colleges, erupting, finally, in the sit-ins and freedom rides, as this swirling maelstrom of social change convulsed the nation. Shocking an unsuspecting American public, folk music, speaking of fundamental verities, climbed slowly out of the grave, and the hip lobe of the national ear, twitching involuntarily at first, began to listen. From the moment that Mrs. Rosa Parks, in that bus in Montgomery, Alabama, resisted the omnipotent administrator, contact, however fleeting, had been made with the lost sovereignty. The body had made contact with its mind, and the shock of that contact sent an electric current throughout this nation, traversing the racial Maginot Line and striking fire in the hearts of the whites. The wheels began to turn, the thaw set in, and though Emmett Till and Mac Parker were dead, though Eisenhower sent troops to Little Rock, though Autherine Lucy's token present at the University of Alabama was a mockery, notwithstanding this, it was already clear that the 1954 major surgical operation had been successful and the patient would live. The challenge loomed on the horizon. Africa, black, enigmatic, and hard-driving, had begun to parade its newly freed nations into the UN, and the Islam of Elijah Muhammad, amplified as it was fired in salvos from the piercing tongue of Malcolm X, was racing through the Negro streets with Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac. Then, as the verbal revolt of the black masses soared to a cacophonous peak, the body, the black Amazons and super-masculine menials, becoming conscious, shouting in 1,000 different ways, "I've got a mind of my own." And as the senator from Massachusetts was saving the nation from the Strangelove grasp of Dirty Dick, injecting as he emerged victorious a new and vivacious spirit into the people with the style of his smile and his wife's hairdo, then, as if a signal had been given, as if the mind had shouted to the body, "I'm ready," the twist, superseding the hula hoop, burst upon the scene like a nuclear explosion, sending its fallout of rhythm into the minds and bodies of the people. The fallout? The hully-gully, the mashed potato, the dog, the smashed banana, the Watusi, the frog, the swim. The twist was a guided missile launched from the ghetto into the very heart of suburbia. The twist succeeded, as politics, religion, and law could never do, in writing in the heart and soul what the Supreme Court could only write on the books. The twist was a form of therapy for a convalescing nation. The omnipotent administrator and the ultra-feminine responded so dramatically, in stampede fashion, to the twist precisely because it afforded them the possibility of reclaiming their bodies again after generations of alienated and disembodied existence. The stiff, mechanical, omnipotent administrators and ultra-feminines presented a startling spectacle as they entered in droves onto the dance floor to learn how to twist. They came from every level of society, from top to bottom, writhing pitifully, though gamely about the floor, feeling exhilarating and soothing new sensations, released from some unknown prison in which their bodies had been encased, a sense of freedom they had never known before, a feeling of communication with some mystical root source of life and vigor, from which sprang a new awareness and enjoyment of the flesh, a new appreciation of the possibilities of their bodies. They were swinging and gyrating and shaking their dead little asses like petrified zombies trying to regain the warmth of life, rekindle the dead limbs, the cold ass, the stone heart, the stiff, mechanical, disused joints with the spark of life. This spectacle truly startled many Negroes, because they perceived it as an intrusion by the mind into the province of the body, and this intimated chaos, because the Negroes knew from the survival experience of their everyday lives that the system within which they were imprisoned was based upon the racial Maginot Line, and that the cardinal sin crossing the line, which was in their experience usually initiated from the black side, was being committed en masse by the whites. The omnipotent administrators and ultra-feminines were storming the Maginot Line. A massive assault had been launched without parallel in American history, and to Negroes it was confusing. Sure, they had witnessed it on the individual scale. They had seen many old fays destroy the Maginot Line in themselves, but this time it had all the appearances of a national movement. There were even rumors that President Kennedy and his Jackie were doing the twist secretly in the White House, that their number one boy had been sent to the Peppermint Lounge in disguise to learn how to twist, and he in turn brought the trick back to the White House. These Negroes knew that something fundamental had changed. "Man, what done got into them old fays?" one asked. "They trying to get back," said another. "Shit," said a young Negro who made his living by shoplifting. "If you ask me, I think it must be the end of the world." "Ooh-wee," said a Negro musician who had been playing at a dance and was now standing back checking the dancers. "Baby, I don't dig this action at all. Look here, baby, pull my coat to what's going down. I mean, have I missed it somewhere? Where have I been, baby? I've been blowing all my life, and I ain't never dug no happenings like this. You know what, man? I'm gonna cut that fucking weed loose. Ooh-wee! Check that little bitch right there. The fuck she trying to do? Is she trying to shake it or break it? Ooh-wee!" A Negro girl said, "Take me home, I'm sick." Another one said, "No, let's stay, this is too much." And a bearded Negro cat, who was not interested in learning how to twist himself, who felt that if he was interested in doing it, he could get up from the table right now and start twisting. He said, sitting at the table with a tinsel-minded female, "It ain't nothing. They just trying to get back, that's all." "Get back?" said the girl, arching her brows quizzically. "Get back from where?" "From wherever they been," said the cat. "Where else?" "Are they doing it in Mississippi is what I want to know," said a tall, deadly-looking Negro who had a long razor line down his left cheek and who had left Mississippi in a hurry one night. And the dancers, they were caught up in a whirl of ecstasy, swinging like pendulums, mechanical like metronomes or puppets on invisible strings, being manipulated by a master with a sick sense of humor. "They look like Chinese doing communal exercise," said a Negro. "That's all they doing, calisthenics." "Yeah," said his companion, "they trying to get in shape." But if at first it was funny and confusing, it was nonetheless a breakthrough. The omnipotent administrators and ultra-feminines were discovering new aspects of the body, new possibilities of rhythm, new ways to move. The hula hoop had been a false start, a mechanized, theatrical attempt by the mind to supply to itself what only the body can give. But with the twist, at last they knew themselves to be swinging. The forces acting upon the world stage in our era had created in the collective psyche of the omnipotent administrators and ultra-feminines an irresistible urge to just stand up and shake the ice and cancer out of their alienated white asses, and the hula hoop and twist offered socially acceptable ways to do it. Of course, not all the whites took part in these joyful experiments. For many, the more suggestive a dance became, i.e., the more it became pure body and less mind, the more scandalous it seemed to them, and their reaction in this sense was an index to the degree of their alienation from their bodies. But what they condemned as a sign of degeneracy and moral decay was actually a sign of health, a sign of hope for full recovery. As Norman Mailer prophesied, the Negro's equality would tear a profound shift into the psychology, the sexuality, and the moral imagination of every white alive. Precisely because the mind will have united with the body, theory will have merged with practice. It is significant that the twist and the hula hoop came into the scene in all their fury at the close of the Eisenhower and the dawn of the Kennedy era. It could be interpreted as a rebellion against the vacuous Eisenhower years. It could also be argued that the same collective urge that gave rise to the twist also swept Kennedy into office. I shudder to think that, given the closeness of the final vote in 1960, Richard Nixon might have won the election in a breeze if he had persuaded one of his ultra-feminine daughters, not to mention ultra-pat, to do the twist in public. Not if Kennedy had stayed on the phone a week sympathizing with Mrs. Martin Luther King Jr. over the fact that the cat was in jail would he have won. Even as I am convinced that Lucy Baines Johnson dancing the Watusi in public with Killer Joe Pirro won more votes for her old man in 1964 than a whole boxcar full of his hog-calling speeches ever did. When the Birmingham Revolt erupted in the summer of 1963 and President Kennedy stepped into the void and delivered his unprecedented speech to the nation on civil rights and sent his bill to Congress, the foundation had been completed. Martin Luther King Jr. giving voice to the needs of the body, and President Kennedy speaking out the needs of the mind, made contact on that day. The twisters, sporting their blue suede shoes, moved beyond the ghost in white shoes who ate a hot dog and sipped malted milk as he danced the mechanical jig of Satan on top of Medgar Evers' tomb. In vain now would the murderers bomb that church and slaughter grotesquely those 4 little black girls. What did they hope to kill? Were they striking at the black of the skin or the fire of the soul? At history? At the body? In vain also the assassin's bullets that crashed through the head of John Kennedy, taking a life, yes, but creating a larger than life and failing utterly to expunge from the record the March on Washington and its truth. That this nation, bourgeois or not, imperialist or not, murderous or not, ugly or not, its people, somewhere in their botched, butchered, and hypocritical souls, still contained an epic potential of spirit, which is its hope, a bottomless potential, which fires the imaginations of its youth. It was all too late. It was too late because it was time for the blacks. I've got a mind of my own. To riot, to sweep through Harlem night like a wave of locusts, breaking, screaming, bleeding, laughing, crying, rejoicing, celebrating in a jubilee of destruction, to regurgitate the white man's bullshit they had been eating for 400 years, smashing the windows of the white man's stores, throwing bricks they wished were bombs, running, leaping, whirling like a cyclone through the white man's mind, past its backlash, through the night streets of Rochester, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and even through the opposition, gorging on hot dogs and malted milk, with blood now splattered over the white shoes, would still strike out in the dark against the manifestations of the turning, showing the protocol of Southern hospitality reserved for niggers and nigger lovers. Schwerner, Cheney, Goodman. It was still too late, for not only had Lucy Baines Johnson danced the Watusi in public with Killer Joe, but the Beatles were on the scene, injecting negritude by the ton into the whites in this post-Elvis Presley beatnik era of ferment. Before we tossed the Beatles a homosexual kiss, saying, "If a man be ass enough to reach for the bitch in them, that man will kiss a man, and if a woman reaches for the stud in them, that woman will kiss a woman," let us marvel at the genius of their image, which comforts the owls and the ostriches in the one spot where Elvis Presley bummed their kick. Elvis, with his unfunky yet mechanical alienated bump grinding, was still too much body, too soon, for the strained collapsing psyches of the omnipotent administrators and ultra-feminines, whereas the Beatles, affecting the Caucasoid crown of femininity and ignoring the body on the visual plane, while their music on the contrary, being full of body, assuaged the doubts of the owls and ostriches by presenting an incorporeal cerebral image. Song and dance are perhaps only a little less old than man himself. It is with his music and dance, the recreation through art of the rhythms suggested by and implicit in the tempo of his life and cultural environment, that man purges his soul of the tensions of daily strife and maintains his harmony in the universe. In the increasingly mechanized, automated, cybernated environment of the modern world, a cold, bodiless world of wheels, smooth plastic surfaces, tubes, push buttons, transistors, computers, jet propulsion, rockets to the moon, atomic energy, man's need for affirmation of his biology has become that much more intense. He feels need for a clear definition of where his body ends and the machine begins, where man ends and the extensions of man begin. This great mass hunger, which transcends national or racial boundaries, recoils from the subtle subversions of the mechanical environment which modern technology is creating faster than man. With his present savage relationship to his fellow men, is able to receive and assimilate. This is the central contradiction of the 20th century, and it is against this backdrop that America's attempt to unite its mind with its body to save its soul is taking place. It is in this connection that the blacks, personifying the body and thereby in closer communion with their biological roots than other Americans, provide the saving link, the bridge between man's biology and man's machines, in its purest form, as adjustment to the scientific and technological environment of our era, as purgative and lullaby soother of man's soul. It is the jazz issuing from the friction and harmony of the American Negro with his environment that captured the beat and tempo of our times. And although modern science and technology are the same, whether in New York, Paris, London, Accra, Cairo, Berlin, Moscow, Tokyo, Peking, or Sao Paulo, jazz is the only true international medium of communication current in the world today, capable of speaking creatively with equal intensity and relevance to the people in all those places. The less sophisticated, but no less body-based, popular music of urban Negroes, which was known as rhythm and blues before the whites appropriated and distilled it into a product they call rock and roll, is the basic ingredient, the core of the gaudy, cacophonous hymns with which the Beatles of Liverpool drive their hordes of ultra-feminine fans into catatonia and hysteria. For Beatle fans, having been alienated from their own bodies so long and so deeply, the effect of those potent erotic rhythms is electric. Into this music, the Negro projected, as it were, drained off, as pus from a sore, a powerful sensuality, his pain and lust, his love and hate, his ambition and his despair. The Negro projected into his music his very body. The Beatles, the four long-haired lads from Liverpool, are offering up as their gift the Negro's body, and in so doing establish a rhythmic communication between the listener's own mind and body. Enter the Beatles, soul by proxy, middlemen between the mind and the body, a long way from Pat Boone's white shoes, a way station on a slow route traveled with all deliberate speed. To all black women from all black men. Queen, mother, daughter of Africa, sister of my soul, black bride of my passion, my eternal love. I greet you, my queen, not in the obsequious whine of a cringing slave to which you have become accustomed. Neither do I greet you in the new voice, the unctuous supplications of the sleek black bourgeoisie, nor the bullying bellow of the rude free slave. But in my own voice do I greet you, the voice of the black man. And although I greet you anew, my greeting is not new, but as old as the sun, moon, and stars. And rather than mark a new beginning, my greeting signifies only my return. I have returned from the dead. I speak to you now from the here and now. I was dead for 400 years. For 400 years you have been a woman alone, bereft of her man, a manless woman. For 400 years I was neither your man nor my own man. The white man stood between us, over us, around us. The white man was your man and my man. Do not pass lightly over this truth, my queen, for even though the fact of it has burned into the marrow of our bones and diluted our blood, we must bring it to the surface of the mind, into the realm of knowing. Glue our gaze upon it and stare at it as at a coiled serpent in a baby's playpen, or the fresh flowers on a mother's grave. It is to be pondered and realized in the heart, for the heel of the white man's boot is our point of departure, our point of resolve and return, the blood-stained pivot of our future. But I would ask you to recall that before we could come up from slavery, we had to be pulled down from our throne. Across the naked abyss of negated masculinity, of 400 years minus my balls, we face each other today, my queen. I feel a deep, terrifying hurt, the pain of humiliation of the vanquished warrior, the shame of the fleet-footed sprinter who stumbles at the start of the race. I feel unjustified. I can't bear to look into your eyes. Don't you know? Surely you must have noticed by now, 400 years, that for 400 years I have been unable to look squarely into your eyes. I tremble inside each time you look at me. I can feel, in the ray of your eye, from a deep hiding place, a long-kept secret you harbor. That is the unadorned truth. Not that I would have felt justified under the circumstances in taking such liberties with you, but I want you to know that I feared to look into your eyes because I knew I would find reflected there a merciless indictment of my impotence and a compelling challenge to redeem my conquered manhood. My queen, it is hard for me to tell you what is in my heart for you today. What is in the heart of all my black brothers for you and all your black sisters, and I fear I will fail unless you reach out to me. Tune in on me with the antenna of your love, the sacred love and ultimate degree which you were unable to give me because I, being dead, was unworthy to receive it. That perfect, radical love of black on which our fathers thrived. Let me drink from the river of your love at its source. Let the lines of force of your love seize my soul by its core and heal the wound of my castration. Let my convex exile and its haunted odyssey in your concave essence, which receives that it may give. Flower of Africa, it is only through the liberating power of your re-love that my manhood can be redeemed. For it is in your eyes before you that my need is to be justified. Only you, and only you can condemn me or set me free. Be convinced, sable sister, that the past is no forbidden vista upon which we dare not look, out of a phantom fear of being as the wife of Lot, turned into pillars of salt. Rather, the past is an omniscient mirror. We gaze and see reflected there ourselves and each other, what we used to be, what we are today, how we got this way, and what we are becoming. To decline to look into the mirror of then, my heart is to refuse to view the face of now. I have died the 9th death of the cat, have seen Satan face to face and turned my back on God, have dined in the swine's trough, and descended to the uttermost echelon of the pit, have entered the den and seized my balls from the teeth of a roaring lion. Black beauty, in impotent silence I listened, as if to a symphony of sorrows, to your screams for help, anguished pleas of terror that echo still throughout the universe and through the mind, a million scattered screams across the painful years that merged into a single sound of pain to haunt and bleed the soul, a white, hot sound to char the brain and blow the fuse of thought, a sound of fangs and teeth sharp to eat the heart, a sound of moving fire, a sound of frozen heat, a sound of licking flames, a fiery, fiery sound, a sound of fire to burn the steel out of my balls, a sound of blue fire, a bluesy sound, the sound of dying, the sound of my woman in pain, the sound of my woman's pain, the sound of my woman calling me. I heard her call for help, I heard that mournful sound, but hung my head and failed to heed it. I heard my woman's cry, I heard my woman scream, I heard my woman beg the beast for mercy, I heard her beg for me, I heard my woman beg the beast for mercy for me, I heard my woman die, I heard the sound of her death, a snapping sound, a breaking sound, a sound that sounded final, the last sound, the ultimate sound, the sound of death. Me, I heard. I hear it every day. I hear her now. I hear you now. I hear you. I heard you then. Your scream came like a searing bolt of lightning that blazed a white streak down my black back. In a cowardly stupor, with a palpitating heart and quivering knees, I watched the slaver's lash of death slash through the opposing air and bite with teeth of fire into your delicate flesh, the black and tender flesh of African motherhood, forcing the startled life untimely from your torn and outraged womb, the sacred womb that cradled primal man, the womb that incubated Ethiopia and populated Nubia and gave forth pharaohs into Egypt, the womb that painted the Congo black and mothered Zulu, the womb of Meroe, the womb of the Nile, of the Niger, the womb of Songhay, of Mali, of Ghana, the womb that felt the might of Shaka before he saw the sun, the holy womb, the womb that knew the future form of Jomo Kenyatta, the womb of Mau Mau, the womb of the blacks, the womb that nurtured Toussaint L'Ouverture, that warmed Nat Turner and Gabriel Prosser and Denmark Vesey, the black womb that surrendered up in tears that nameless and endless chain of Africa's cream, the black cream of the earth, that nameless and endless black chain that sank in heavy groans into oblivion in the great abyss, the womb that received and nourished and held firm the seed and gave back Sojourner Truth and Sister Tubman and Rosa Parks and Bird and Richard Wright and your other works of art who were and wear such names as Marcus Garvey and Du Bois and Kwame Nkrumah and Paul Robeson and Malcolm X and Robert Williams, and the one you bore in pain and called Elijah Muhammad, but most of all that nameless one they tore out of your womb in a flood of murdered blood that splashed upon and seeped into the mud, and Patrice Lumumba and Emmett Till and Mac Parker. Oh my soul, I became a sniveling craven, a funky punk, a vile, groveling bootlicker, with my will to oppose, petrified by a cosmic fear of the slave master. Instead of inciting the slaves to rebellion with eloquent oratory, I soothed their heart and eloquently sang the blues. Instead of hurling my life with contempt into the face of my tormentor, I shed your precious blood. When Nat Turner sought to free me from my fear delivered him up unto the butcher, a martyred monument to my emasculation. My spirit was unwilling and my flesh was weak. Ah, eternal ignominy! I, the black eunuch, divested of my balls, walked the earth with my mind locked in cold storage. I would kill a black man or woman quicker than I'd smash a fly, while for the white man I would pick 1,000 pounds of cotton a day. What profit is there in the blind, frenzied efforts of the guilty black eunuchs, justifiers, who hide their wounds and scorn the truth to mitigate their culpability through the pallid sophistry of postulating a universal democracy of cowards, pointing out that in history no one can hide, that if not at one time, then surely at another the iron heel of the conqueror has ground into the mud the balls of every man. Memories of yesterday will not assuage the torrents of blood that flow today from my crotch. Yes, history could pass for a scarlet text, its jot and tittle graven red in human blood. More armies than shown in the books have planted flags on foreign soil, leaving castration in their wake. But no slave should die a natural death. There is a point where caution ends and cowardice begins. Give me a bullet through the brain from the gun of the beleaguered oppressor on the night of siege. Why is there dancing and singing in the slave quarters? A slave who dies of natural causes cannot balance two dead flies in the scales of eternity. Such a one deserves rather to be pitied than mourned. Black woman, without asking how, just say that we survived our forced march and travail through the valley of slavery, suffering, and death. There, that valley there beneath us, hidden by that drifting mist. Ah, what sights and sounds and pain lie beneath that mist. And we had thought that our hard climb out of that cruel valley led to some cool, green, and peaceful sunlit place. But it's all jungle here. A wild and savage wilderness that's overrun with ruins. But put on your crown, my queen, and we will build a new city on these ruins. End of Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleaver.